This video contains full spoilers for the first season of Creature Commandos. Creature Commandos Season 1 was the very first project released as a part of the new DCU, the James Gunn-led interconnected universe that connects TV shows to movies to apparently video games, and from animation to live action, and all things considered, Creature Commandos Season 1 was a pretty fantastic and yet definitely imperfect start. This video will be my review of Creature Commandos Season 1. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to help me get to 150,000 subscribers, and join as a YouTube member for as low as 99 cents a month to help support the channel, and for a few perks like early access to videos and priority replies. Let's begin. Okay, so first of all, this show is animated, which is mostly a big positive. I really like the art style. It was relatively simple in that it feels like it could be translated into live action without losing any of the style of the series, but also it's unique in its black outlines on the characters. Generally, I prefer a more realistic looking art style in 2D animation compared to something more cartoony, as it's cartoony but not ridiculous looking, but I am well aware that that is entirely a subjective take. The animation was also really great, never feeling stiff or cheap like certain other animated DC shows that recently came out, with some great action scenes and unique uses of movement and each character's abilities. In particular, Dr. Phosphorus really stood out. He clearly brought more visually to the series than absolutely anyone else, both in his design and in his powers. Something I didn't love in the action scenes, and this again is a personal opinion, I'm just not a huge fan of the over-the-top goriness, which is true for other similar shows like Harley Quinn or Invincible. I think the blood and guts is mostly a cheap trick to attempt to make the action scenes hit harder, but honestly, they usually have the opposite effect of making otherwise great action scenes feel lesser, and that the enemies feel like they're always just torn through, which in turn makes the stakes feel lower, and it makes the Commandos feel unstoppable, specifically the Bride in every single fight aside from her one with Cersei, and Dr. Phosphorus literally always, and the story also then doesn't work as well because of it. For instance, in the finale when the Commandos seemingly couldn't get past the guards to get to Alana, I just couldn't believe it because of how easily those guards have been torn through up until this point, and how unstoppable Phosphorus and the Bride have felt. I think if the enemies were generally sturdier, things would have felt more believable. Alongside the gratuitous violence, there was also a lot of gratuitous horniness, which usually felt unnecessary. I do think there should be some in a project like this. I think the lack of any sex at all in the MCU, for instance, is noticeable, but the sheer amount here is definitely a bit much. Getting back to the visuals, I only have positive things to say from here on out. I really like the character designs. The settings were ever-changing and interesting, from Bacolistan to Belle Reve to Gotham City to Star City. Every location looked distinct, with the same going for the distinct time periods shown in Backstories, which each felt a bit different. The show also had a tendency to surprise me with some really nice looking backgrounds of varying colors, alongside shifting lighting that made for a show that was always interesting to look at, and very pleasant to look at as well. Finally, for the visuals, I love the look of the intro. In fact, the intro was fantastic in general, passing the bar for being an intro that I never even once considered skipping. More than how it looks though, this was due to the song choice, Maliendo Cafe by Fanfare Choker Lia, a perfectly fitting tune that by episode 3 got stuck in my head, and from that point on was something that got me hyped for when it came on. I absolutely loved this intro, almost as much as the intro for Peacemaker. I think every DC show, every show in general, should have something like this. I hate it when a show just has a title card. This is so much better. This speaks to the music in general, which, as to be expected in any James Gunn project, is great, with what feels like carefully crafted and picked individual songs for each scenario that mostly came from a specific genre that gives the show a unique auditory vibe. In the Guardians movies, it ranged from 60s to 90s rock with Christmas music in the holiday special. In Peacemaker, it was heavy metal, and here, it's Eastern European folk music to fit the show's primary setting of the fictional Eastern European country of Bacolistan. Now, this particular genre, like the music on Peacemaker, isn't usually to my taste compared to the Guardians music, but still, James Gunn absolutely excels when it comes to how he uses music in a project, and there are a handful of songs here that I added to my likes on Spotify. Another thing that James Gunn excels at is making you care about previously completely unknown characters, and that absolutely happens here with the core 7 members of the Creature Commandos. Each character, with the exception of Flag, is given a backstory focus from episode 2 onwards, a very unique and very character-focused seasonal structure that did do a fantastic job at giving these characters dimensions, telling really great short stories, and absolutely crushing it in the world-building department. However, by the end of the finale, it becomes clear how much this structure came at the detriment of the main plot of the season, which I'll get back to. The backstories definitely range in quality. By far the worst, and the only one that I didn't like, is Eric Frankenstein's, which, while charming and horrifying all in one, does nothing to expand on his character or the lore of the universe, which becomes even more frustrating when, by the end of the series, Eric's character feels like he didn't really contribute to the main plot, like, at all. Every other backstory backstory, however, is pretty great, with the worst of the best in my opinion being G.I. Robot. The world building here was incredible, between the introduction of Easy Company to G.I. Robot being studied to create the Metal Men to cameos of a few obscure villains. Seeing him kill Nazis is satisfying, and it all leading up to his death in the present day definitely worked, but I'd say it would have been a bit more effective if we saw him actually bonding with Easy Company, since that was meant to be the story's emotional core. Then is the Bride, whose backstory was horrifying, gruesome, and uncomfortable, and ended in a really fun montage that all cut together really well with the present. Dr. Phosphorus is next, with added tragedy to his comic origin. This was really brutal, and a great portrayal of a Batman villain origin, not to mention how awesome its ending was, with Batman getting a proper badass cameo. With his mere presence, we could assume that this unstoppable tank-destroying meta was defeated. It's awesome. The second best backstory is Nina Mazursky, because of how touching I found her relationship with her father to be, how he loved her no matter what since birth. It made the scene where he cries over her leaving a bit of a tearjerker moment. The story also had great visuals and fantastic dialogue. Finally, the best backstory is Weasel's, another backstory that made me tear up. This one hurt like hell. Seeing Weasel playing with those kids only for it to end in such tragedy. The music was incredible, the visuals incredible as well, and even the voice acting. It all came together to make for some of the best moments, maybe the best moments of the series. My character ranking, however, would be a bit different. This time let's go from best to worst. Overall, I'd say my favorite character is Dr. Phosphorus. I absolutely loved his design and powers. He brings more to the table visually than basically everyone else combined. He's also really funny, has one of the better backstories, and easily the best voice actor. The Bride, however, was definitely the most well-developed character of the series and is neck and neck with Phosphorus. She's badass, has a really great dynamic with Nina, and very believably replaces Flag as the leader of the Commandos, feeling like a more effective one. Flag, I'd say, was my favorite character early on, but definitely fell off near the end of the season. He is absolutely badass, Frank Grillo's voice fits perfectly, and he pulls off the older look really well. I was never comfortable with his relationship with Ilana, which unfortunately did end up making him look bad because of how poorly he read her. Still, Flag is badass, and I did love his friendship with Frankenstein, who was easily the greatest source of comedy in the series, and generally was one of the most unique characters I've ever seen. An immortal, hyper-violent, super-strength psychopath with the emotional capability of a toddler, but the intelligence of an adult man. What sucks is that he didn't end up contributing to the main plot at all, aside from maybe just defeating Clayface and bringing Flag to the hospital, but they could have also written that to be slightly different, and Frankenstein could have been left in the past. That said, he is higher than Weasel, for instance, because, well, Weasel had zero dialogue. Weasel did have the best backstory, and I like what they did with him thinking Ilana looked like the little girl, but for most of the season, he didn't really do much. But also, I can't really think of anything more you could do with Weasel that kind of used him to his fullest potential. G.I. Robot was a very entertaining character with a gimmick that remained funny for his tenure on the show, and who had a very cute but short friendship with Nina Mazursky. But also, he was only around for 3 episodes, and I could see his gimmick having gotten annoying had he not been destroyed in episode 3. We'll see if that's true going forward. And then is Nina Mazursky, who is my least favorite of the Commandos, but I'm also torn on it. She does have one of the better backstories, had some great dynamics with G.I. Robot and the Bride, and ultimately, I get what they were going for with her character by the end, but at the same time, I think it really could have been executed a lot better. Throughout the season, I kept waiting for Nina to do something, and she never did. It felt like they were setting her up to have a secret power or to be useful in a specific situation, and that never happened, except when it did, it felt very forced, because why is Ilana going for a swim now? Why is she not worried about the unstoppable monsters going after her? And also, like I said earlier, I never believed the Bacalstan guards posed any threat to Phosphorus and the Bride, meaning they could have easily just gone to kill her themselves. And then, Nina just dies. Again, I can understand what they were going for here. Nina looks like a monster and therefore was sent to prison and sent on a mission like this, but she isn't actually a monster at all. She's very kind and a pacifist. This is meant to contrast with Ilana Rostovic, who is beautiful and royalty, and yet is a monster. I get it, but I think Ilana's lack of focus and development, combined with Nina being around for so long doing nothing, made this not work as well as it could have. I think something like this should have been placed in the middle of the season, and then going forward, we would see more of Ilana, learn more about her, and this would be a mid-season twist. As the finale, it did not work in my opinion. But that's mostly due to the show's greatest fault, its worst character, Ilana Rostovic. Again, I could see what Gunn was trying to go for here, but this character was unbelievably undercooked. She acts unusually from the get-go, being defined entirely by her horniness for Flag. Then she is prophesized to somehow take over the world, and then it's revealed she's just straight up evil, and she's killed. I have so many remaining questions about this character. I mean, we know nothing about her, and that's a huge problem because she's the central focal point of the plot, and ultimately the main villain. Ilana is a one-dimensional, shallow character whose lack of dimensions directly worsened the plot of the series in such a way that what we were left with wasn't great. That isn't to say that the show itself isn't good, it just had a bit of a weak plot and it was going for a different structure. One that, instead of using the main plot to tell a good story, used the main plot as a backdrop to allow for several quality short stories to be told, for the Commandos to be developed, and more than anything, I think for the DC universe to be built. I think the show, more than anything, excelled at world building. Pulled off by it being animation, as well as a project connected to the loose cannon projects that came before, with references mentioning certain events like Project Starfish and the Butterfly Invasion. The timeline is showcased backing up to the 1830s, the 1940s, the 1960s, and the 2000s. Many different fictional locations are mentioned, a dozen or so villains appear, hinting at other unconfirmed heroes, and we get the technical debuts of like 15 different superheroes, a few of whom have yet to be confirmed for the DCU up until this point, like Starfire or The Flash. This being animated, spanning decades and the entire globe, and being a direct sequel to the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, made for the perfect amount of world building to kickstart this universe off. And that's the reason that this was the perfect project to kickstart this universe, not because it's a perfect project, far from it, but because it lays the groundwork for the world building of this immense interconnected DC universe in, I think, the best possible way, in animation and with connections to past projects. I previously reviewed each individual episode of the show in 6 separate videos, and the episodic scores were as follows. Episodes 1, 2, 3, 5, and 7 all got 8s, episode 6 got a 9, and episode 4 got a 10. These scores, however, were at times a bit generous because of the open questions that the season was yet to resolve. As the finale rolled around, there were elements of the season that, looking back, maybe weren't as strong as I thought. For instance, Ilana Rostovik's entire character never got any expansion in any way, making her role in the season retroactively a bit worse. Frankenstein's character ended up feeling like he didn't have much impact on the plot, which makes something like him getting a backstory focus in episode 6 feel even less necessary. I won't be changing the scores of each individual episode, but I do think the season is a bit lesser than the sum of its parts. The episodic average came out to an 8.43 out of 10. Let's just round that down to an 8 out of 10, which is where I'd leave the rating of the season, because while the plot ended up being disappointing and the main villain bad, most every other element and aspect of the series was great, like the comedy and character dynamics, while other aspects were fantastic, like the visuals, animation, music, short storytelling, and world building. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and bye.